So at this point, I would like to invite up my colleague, Josh Leonard, who's an attorney with our firm, Clark Wardle, and B. Black from the Women and Children's Alliance to talk about housing and the programs that they provide. We have been fortunate to have a relationship with them and to visit with them, and we're grateful to have B back with us today because she was here for the Pacific Northwest as well. So thank you.
Before we start off, I want to take a quick minute to introduce B Black and what she does. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the Women's and Children's Alliance does here in Boise. But I wanted to introduce B to the group. B prior to joining the Women's and Children's Alliance, B was in various businesses for about 30 years. Mostly accounting and software related, but she also owned had an office product store for several years. Just before coming to the WCA, the Women's and Children's Alliance, she spent 3 years with Neighborhood Housing Services, and she was responsible for their tax credit properties. One of the favorite things I've heard from B is that she considers the 33 years in business just training for her time at the Women's and Children's Alliance. In 2013, she was identified and honored as one of that year's CEOs of Influence by the Idaho Business Review, and she accepted that award on behalf of her staff at the Women's and Children's Alliance. She also hosts a monthly online video blog. You can see how up to speed on things I am, right? It's called the B Line, which covers topics like boundaries, the power of resilience, and reflecting on yourself to see how you've grown. As I mentioned, we want to talk a little bit about the Women's and Children's Alliance and how their mission intersects with the issues of homelessness and housing here, especially in the Treasure Valley. B, if you would, what are some of what is the Women's and Children's Alliance? What's the mission, the goals?
So thank you for that very kind introduction, and it's very nice to be here with you all this afternoon. I have to say that I am so impressed and delighted that you all are spending the time learning about these issues and better understanding the rest of our community, some of the community members that we don't necessarily see each and every day. So thank you for that. So at the Women's and Children's Alliance, the work that we do each and every day is to provide safety, healing, and freedom from domestic abuse and sexual assault. Our vision, however, is much longer than that, and that is to create and to foster a community in which we all can thrive in safe and healthy relationships. I think it'll be a while before we get to that point, but that is where we're trying to get to.
I know I generally think of the Treasure Valley and Boise and our community as being a pretty safe place. Is that perception, is that true? Is that borne out in the numbers?
Unfortunately, it's not. Right here in River City, we fall into the same numbers that the rest of the country does, which is that between 1 and 3 and 4 women will be in a domestically abusive and or violent relationship at some point in their life. 1 in 7 men, 1 in 4 women will be sexually assaulted at some point, 1 in 6 men, and for both sexes it tends to happen before the age of 20. I think that some of this has started to be borne out even more in our consciousness as we see what has come out in the news, and whether it's on TV or print, of things that have gone on many, many years ago in some very organized ways and just actually been part of the accepted culture. And so you start to look at those numbers and you go, maybe they're not that far off. And unfortunately, in the 11 years that I've been at the WCA, I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of individuals, usually a couple thousand per year, and it never fails. There's always somebody that comes up after we speak or present, and they share. It's either themselves, or it's a family member, or a loved one. It's someone that they've lost. There are so many cases. It's one of those secrets that people don't want to talk about for obvious reasons. So we work to make ourselves an approachable place where individuals who have those issues can come. And we also work, and are doing more now with our youth, to try to give them the tools so that they can identify amongst themselves in their own families and then work together to try to turn this tide. Because we're never going to get ahead of this unless we can back it up and start with our youngsters. And first of all, they have to understand what is a healthy relationship. Because if you haven't grown up in one that is healthy, how would you even know that it wasn't?
Yeah, one of the numbers that you gave really struck me, and that's that a lot of this occurs with people under the age of 20 when they're victims. And that they probably keep that with them the rest of their lives.
Yeah, unfortunately, part of the statistics tell us that individuals who end up either as abusers or living in abusive relationships, they have typically been the ones who have experienced it in their own lives growing up. And so, you know, kids, do they always do what we say? But they usually do what we do, right? So they're a very good example of how you set an example in actions and they will continue to carry that out. So what we're trying to do is back it up to where we can help them break that cycle.
That shoots down one of my parenting strategies, do as I say, not as I do.
We all get caught with that. Kids are great mirrors.
You mentioned that some of the parts of the WCA's core mission are safety, healing, and freedom. What are some of the services offered to achieve those missions, or those goals?
So probably one of the ones that is most applicable here, we have a safe shelter. And what I would tell you is, even with the work that we do with Our Path Home, which is a way that we have worked the last couple of years to create a more streamlined manner for individuals experiencing homelessness to get into housing. Domestic violence and abuse is one of the major causes of homelessness in our community and across our country. So with the 30 rooms that we have at our shelter, we provide housing for 30 moms and as many kids as they bring. That can be anywhere from 2 to 3, that's the typical mom that moves into our shelter, to 5 or 6. We have the ability for them to stay with us for 4 months in what we call emergency shelter, and then an additional 4 months in what we call our transitional shelter. So they could be with us for a total of 8 months. That second 4 months became really critical in the last few years as housing prices have gone up and as housing options have really narrowed. I would say that last year's numbers, 85% of the clients that lived in our shelter had annual incomes of less than $12,000 a year. So you try and find something today, even if you can pay full price, it's pretty tough. You try to find something on that kind of income and it's virtually impossible. Brett talked about some of the issues that families face when they're going and applying for a place to live. This is especially true of our clients. Many of them have suffered financial abuse, and so they have no credit. They have no credit history. They probably can't even get a bank account because their credit has been so destroyed. So there are a multitude of reasons why, not to mention the fact that they just don't even have a good stream of income. So what we try to do during the 4 to 8 months that they're with us, we wrap them with services, and you heard how important that is from Jennifer. They get counseling, they get case management, they get financial empowerment, they get one-on-one counseling for financial issues. We try to wrap them with all of those services and then help them develop a plan of how they're going to move forward. Connect them with community services, because we do have a lot of amazing community services in Boise. I think, again, as Brett said many times, they don't know how to tap into those, but that's where our case managers come in. They know how to help them find out about, think through, and then access those services. So now they have an environment where they can, first of all, be safe. By the way, 49% of the individuals that moved into our shelter last year, the most recent abuse was attempted strangulation, which is a very high flag for lethality. So 49%, and most of them suffered abuse on a daily basis. So they really need that safe shelter. So wrap them in services, help them figure out a game plan to move forward, and then we work with our community resources to try to help them establish a way that they can live for themselves and their kids once they move out of our shelter.
One of the things I recognized as early in my career as a prosecutor, where I'd prosecute these domestic violence offenders, was that, as you said, it can be a cause of homelessness, and not necessarily even for the offender, but also for victims. One of the things you mentioned was financial abuse. If you talk a little bit about that, and also about other ways that the domestic violence that affects homelessness, or that affects the ability for people to have a home.
Yeah, thank you for that. I would say that when there's a couple ways that you can create financial abuse. One is that you can take out credit cards in your partner's name. How many credit card things do we get in the mail each and every day? Think about how easy that is, right? You take out a credit card in your partner's name, you rack up the bills and you don't pay them. Really a quick way to destroy somebody's financial capacity. Another way is that you basically torpedo any job that they get. And so that can look a number of different ways. If you have somebody that is working a shift, you simply delete text messages or emails that they might be getting from their employer about what their shift is, or that there was a shift change, or there was a request for you to fill in. So you come across to your employer as somebody who is not responsible, not reliable, somebody they can't depend on. I point some of those things out because part of what we try to do with the outreach at our organization is we will come and talk to employers, we'll come and talk to employee groups. We try to talk about some of the signs and symptoms, because what we found, and you probably know this yourselves, until somebody shows that they are a safe place to talk about an issue, people aren't going to bring it up. So if you are willing to take the extra time and say, hey, I've noticed this pattern, is there something going on here that you might want to share? That's one way to try to dig behind it, because job sabotage is a really good way to torpedo somebody's financial progress. And what do you look for as an employer? You try to look for some consistency in jobs. So here's the other thing. If you keep torpedoing somebody's job, and now you look at someone who has changed jobs every 3 to 4 months, that's not necessarily very attractive from an employment standpoint. So there are some really clever ways that people can financially abuse somebody and never lay a hand on them, make them completely dependent on them. I heard from somebody just the other day that the one partner was the breadwinner, but the other partner said, you know, I'm much better at the financial, so I'll take care of the money. Took care of the money, all right, invested it all in another business, which then went defunct. So that pretty much took care of both parties' financial wherewithal. So you really can't even begin to figure out all the different ways that people can sabotage somebody financially.
It was really eye-opening for me seeing it, and seeing that one of the things we would seek to do is obtain an order from the court not allowing contact, a no contact order, and what we were functionally doing was putting one of them out of the house, often in situations in which they couldn't afford one household, let alone two. Of course, safety was the paramount concern, and it was done with a good heart, but at the same time it had consequences that were tough. Today, we have a large group of folks who are involved in building management and ownership of commercial real estate or commercial buildings here in town. And one of the things that I've noticed about downtown is it seems like anyway, a growing number of homeless people. And one of the things that I thought before getting more involved in the issue was that there was a choice involved there. It seems to me that it's less a choice and more a circumstance, and more facts and circumstances. You mentioned services. What types of services are available for these folks?
So I do think you're right. There is more homelessness, and I was thinking as I was walking over here today, domestic violence is definitely one cause. It's one thing that, and I think that's why most of the women that come to our shelter have 2 or more kids, is that they'll put up with some of that abuse for themselves. They'll even put up with some of it for financial reasons for a few years, but then when they finally see it starting to take a toll on their kids, or they start to see in their kids the same actions that they're experiencing, that's when they're finally said, you know, I can't do this anymore. But it is something that's one cause. Rising medical bills. I think that there are so many families that live right on the edge of homelessness because it takes a really good medical bill to send them over. It takes a couple of house payments past due for their home to be repossessed. It takes really poor, in my opinion, we don't have a livable wage, so people are borderline anyway. So all of those things contribute to homelessness. It's not just one cause. We have what's called a self-help manual, and I don't know if everybody knows about it, but that's one thing that I would commend to all of you if you are interested in helping other individuals either within your organizations or that you might run across. It is an online resource guide. It's updated every 6 months. They do their best to try to make sure that all the contacts in there, whether it's for food, medical services, dental services, housing, whatever the case might be, that you can help direct somebody to where they can plug in. So that would be one resource, I would say, because we have a lot available in Boise.
Fantastic, and I want to thank Bea for always being ready at a moment's notice to come and talk about these issues and to share her mission and the WCA's mission. I also want to just a quick plug for we did a tour over at the WCA a few weeks ago, and it was heartfelt, and it was really great. One of the things that we learned during that tour was about the shop, the store that's in the basement of their facility. It's a high-end thrift store, and it really had some great stuff. And I'd encourage you to stop by there and take a look, or if you have items that you're not using anymore, to just stop by and drop them off. You bet. And if we could give Bea a hand.